Hey everybody. I've been here for a moment listening to the bamboo. In the little bamboo forest here in the botanical gardens. People, as you can see, they, without me showing anything too detailed, so as not to popularize the behavior, some people have carved their names or initials or slogans or schools or something like this into the living bark of the trees. Particularly interested in this one little clicky sound that I thought might potentially be an animal, but I think it isn't. I think it's the bamboo. When I was younger, I didn't really carve my name on things very often, I don't think. And I generally avoided carving my name into something that's alive. But I was ignorant and naive and young in my own ways, and I made bad mistakes. Harmed living beings, sometimes catastrophically, sometimes on purpose, which is really unusual for me because I'm extremely sensitive. But I went through a phase where, because my friend had a BB gun, very bad things happened for a while. And I even, as a child who watched and was profoundly moved by Bambi, I had my moment as the hunter in that story, and I had to live with it, and I still live with it to this day. And it's extremely painful. I have done bad things and made bad mistakes. Things I regret deeply and wish I could undo. And almost all of the things that I actually regret have to do with harming living beings or having been usually relatively ignorantly cruel. Sometimes to someone who loved me, or perhaps occasionally to someone I didn't know very well. In that latter bracket, primarily are people who I've responded to fiercely in text. And my Facebook newsfeed is somewhat unforgiving in terms of I can look back in my history and see the arc of my development of patience and forbearance and understanding, because in the early days I could be extremely severe with anyone who disagreed with me, and in some cases this resulted in people just thinking I was an asshole, which wasn't really true. It was more that I was behaving like an asshole in a specific situation, right? In other words, there were an array of situations in which I could really be a jerk, rather than the fact that I was a jerk. And this again is the problem with the difference between a field and a unit. when we're thinking about phenomena, whichever one of those is correct. We like to collapse fields to units and then declare some quality as pervading over the unit. Darren is an asshole, which would be a really funny thing, because it would mean I'd be like an asshole with legs and hands and a mouth and all these things that, generally speaking, would, be comical. But of course we don't mean an actual asshole, we just mean a not nice person, a person who's mean. And there are certainly a few people who think that I'm a not nice person. And I have very few enemies, but I do have a few. None of them did I make on purpose. Generally, it takes a lot of abuse before I will react in a aggressive or violent or mean way. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. To earn my ire ordinarily requires relatively superhuman or extremely significant lengths. But again, we are not known to ourselves in the ways we imagine, because we are not units, we are fields. We are phenomenon that transform based on our understanding and relationship with context, circumstance, questions, purposes, roles, and our conscious, unconscious, intuitive, and biological measuring of these things. And I now recall that in a previous episode I claimed I would speak about measuring, and I hope to, though that is not my goal today, perhaps because I am relatively unprepared and have a few other things in mind. And whether or not I follow my agenda is a separate question. But one of my ideas today is to explore the idea of questing. To go on a quest. Now, today, I had some errands to run. And I was having a difficult day. One might say, in colloquial language, I wasn't quite myself. And I'm sure a lot of us have felt this way lately, that we are not quite ourselves in various ways and for various reasons, some personal, some local, some universal. So I had a couple of errands to run. I had to go to places where I knew I might have to wait in line and be around other people and be subject to various threats. And I did not particularly feel, as I often might otherwise meaning if we weren't presently suffering the pandemic, that I would also be subject to certain opportunities. Right? That in leaving my house I would experience opportunities. Now, of course, I still experience opportunities, but what I don't experience so much are opportunities for making friends, or flirting, or a moment of kindness with a stranger, or an adventure together with someone new to me, which has happened a number of times, not many, but a few times in the gardens, primarily with females, and that's an exciting, experience for me, particularly as I'm getting on in years. And as we get older, loneliness becomes a bit more of a, for many of us, a bit more of a threat, a bit more of a common experience. Now, this looks like the actual flower of the pipevine plant, which is what the swallowtail butterfly larvae eat, and I haven't seen this before, and it's quite exotic, right? Look at this puppy, right? To pollinate this looks relatively difficult. Here's an older one, and wow, this is really very exotic, in that its shape is just so unexpected and uncommon and unfamiliar. Look at that. It's amazing. I was pausing because I'm disappointed. I tend to pay attention to small details, and I form relationships with small creatures that are important to me. And it is clear to me that somebody has come along right here on this rock for reasons I do not understand. But right here, you can see where the string of one of these chrysalises was. Here's one that opened, and here's a skin that has fallen down that was previously up here. There was a chrysalis right here, and it's gone. And it's not very likely that it's gone. It certainly didn't fall off, right? It's not somewhere here on the ground. The most likely the most likely cause of its disappearance was a mean human. Although I suppose it could have been an accidental problem. So, I long ago learned from playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and RuneQuest, and what else do we play? Arduin, Call of Cthulhu. A lot of these are Chaosium games. I was a huge fan of RuneQuest, though D&D was pretty damn fun too, but RuneQuest was a little cooler. It had oh, I see. Like, it had hit location, right, and parrying and stuff, which D&D sort of abstracted into saving throws and things like this. Well, but I loved those games. They helped me to understand aspects of mathematics and percentages and stuff like this that I had never before understood, because I had no context in which to understand them that was meaningful to me. Working out equations on paper sucked. I hated it. So I wasn't particularly good at, just abstractly doing mathematics. But once I began coding, things started to change. I began to understand what algebra was about, because I had something to do with it, right? There was a way I could employ these theorems and equations and ways of transforming numbers, figures. And understanding computers was one of the quests I took on. And And so too was playing the guitar. That was a quest, because it was an extremely difficult thing that I was not innately well suited for. I struggled terribly with the early phases, especially when I was very young. I decided it was impossible. Learning to drive a car was a quest. Becoming a poet was a quest. But I think the dimension of my life in which questing was most relevant was the domain we would ordinarily refer to either as, well, I'm gonna use three words: mysticism, spirituality, and philosophical understanding. These three domains. And the one that I'm going to pick to highlight is the one whose name is most value-laden. And by the way, while we're talking about humans that do stupid things, this is the kind of stupid thing some human purposefully did. And almost certainly that human was someone who was in here at night most likely someone we would ordinarily refer to as homeless. It's very unlikely a park visitor, garden visitor pulled that off, because it's a lot of damage. It would take a lot of work, and it would probably take work with a tool. Now, some people have quests of destruction, and people who are psychotic or addicted to drugs or schizophrenic, they often form the kind of black hole opposite of a quest, where they want to visit destruction, usually for the sake of vengeance, for wrongs they feel they have suffered unjustly at the hands of others. That was such a wrong. I personally believe that extremely loud motorcycles should have a built-in function where, as they make louder and louder sounds, the chance that they will detonate an onboard explosive charge increases dramatically, so that if you want to attack people at random in like a 1 to 5 mile radius, if you want to execute sonic attacks on those people and trees and animals and plants and insects, you could do it, as long as you're aware that you may well explode. But yeah, I've never understood why incredibly loud machines are legal. Machines that literally aggressively assault the sensorium of everything for miles around them, or even, half a mile around them. But particularly the really loud motorcycles. I mean, chainsaws, it's kind of obvious why that's loud. But motorcycles are loud on purpose. And that's fucked up. In any case, the questing that I'm most fascinated with often involves quest ions, which we might imagine as particles of quest, or gravitic curiosities, gravitic instances of curiosity in the landscape of questing. And some of these we can reasonably refer to as questions, which is a word that can be deconstructed to quest I on, like quest I am on, or quest I is on, right? And that little S at the end, questions, that little S implies transformation over fields of movement, or, enacted curiosity. I am curious. Let's see, okay. So I'm an extremely curious person in both senses of the word, meaning some might think me exotic, curious in that sense. But I'm curious in that I'm constantly forming, pursuing, and re-resolving questions. Sometimes I answer them. For example, there are questions that have natural endpoints. Questions involving repair or troubleshooting, right? What is wrong with this hard drive that I use? What is wrong with my television? What is wrong with my refrigerator, my washing machine, my water heater? Why isn't there enough water pressure? These kinds of things. So there are questions that have like natural endpoints, right? But then there are another species of questions for which there are no natural endpoints, and as you pursue the question, it re-resolves as you gain insight into the context and the players and the forces and the characteristics and so on. Questions like, why are we born? Or what is the nature of intelligence? What does insight mean? How do we tell insight from delusion? Do we have souls? Was there something resembling life before birth? Is there something resembling life after death? What is the nature of dreaming? Are all dreams the same thing? How do we distinguish a vision from a dream? Is telepathy real? Can we touch the minds of other beings? Is it possible to change into an animal in the ways we hear stories of the ancients doing? Do the divine beings visit Earth? Can we encounter them? Are they accessible to us? These are questions that, some of these questions have yes or no answers, but not too many of them. But most of them, as we pursue them, we engage in a quest. Now, most of the things, what is the nature of light? What is the nature of time? Why is there space rather than just a solidness or one speck that's all things? Why are things distributed in space-time? Questions like these. And I'm fascinated by questions like these. And I suspect I always will be while I still have some remaining shred of motivation and intelligence left to me. Presuming that I myself am actually as distinct as it ordinarily seems to me I am. And so to you. So, we can embark on a quest. For example, I have a quest that I am on now, that I've been on for quite some time. And I've had modest moments of partial success so far, with the help of a dear friend who I think has already accomplished a few iterations of a very similar quest. I'm not going to name it since it's relatively private and could be confusing, but it involves receiving a specific kind of gift that is useful from the living world and from living places. And maybe such gifts have to be earned. Because it's not the kind of thing where you can just go buy one of these. Though some people might imagine and play it out otherwise. So I have this quest that I'm on. I've been on it now for about 8 months, and I've had only some modest success, but occasional encouragement that it is at least conceivably possible. And I like quests that seem impossible at first glance, like the quest to achieve contact with a non-human intelligence is a lifelong quest that I eventually suspect, I have good reason to suspect, I had at least the resemblance of some success at, in a big way. One can accomplish modest subsets of that quest by simply relating with living beings around us intelligently, including plants and insects and animals and the soil itself, microbes and so on. But I wanted the big deal, right? I wanted something on the order of importance of establishing contact with an intelligent non-human species, right? A species whose intelligence is at least similar enough to our own that it would be that we would be comprehensible to each other, and we could exchange perspectives and ideas and thoughts and questions and experiences and knowledge, learning, and so on. This is more the thing that I'm still very interested in chasing. And it's the kind of thing science fiction treats of. Wherever science fiction is written about humans meeting other intelligent, by which we usually mean representationally intelligent, probably machine building, but not necessarily life forms. So I'm extremely fond of good questions. And I have a very significant library of them that I have adopted, forged, become aware of, become excited by, enthusiastic about. And I remember at some point in my Zen training, which is itself a kind of question, right? One could frame it various ways, but what's the nature of the self? What's the nature of death, right? What's the nature of life? The nature of being? What is the essentially most crucial insight or awakening one can experience as a human being? What does it mean to cut through the mind? To cut off the mind road? What do these things mean? What is this like? What happens when these inward transformations, if we imagine them as such, occur? And I remember thinking myself rather precocious, which essentially means learns too much too quickly, and sometimes in the wrong way. I remember that in high winds, large branches can break off and kill you. Especially in here, where we have not just gum trees and eucalyptuses, but we've got cypress trees, and which this is a common event with them. Common, relatively speaking, right? But I remember one day I thought, I'll be very smart. I'll find what the most important question is. And so I forged the question, what is the most important question? And I think I approached my Zen teacher at that time, probably Joseph Bobro, with this question. And I don't remember exactly what he told me, but I remember what I learned about it on my own later. And it was probably equivalent to what he told me. And what he told me was probably simpler than what I'll present here. But essentially he said, it isn't that one. And he seemed quite sure of it. And I was rather puzzled, because I thought that I had found the question measuring filter that was crucial, right? I thought I found the way to measure. I was starting to attempt to measure the importance of questions as though this could be done abstractly, meaning in a way that was general and would apply to all possible questions. And later I came to understand in a sort of more intuitive than technical way, though I might be able to present a technical map of it, why that's the wrong question. In the sense of, now one can't really say it's the wrong question. It would be better to say the perspective that produces a question like this is in nearly all cases delusional or confused, right? Because the nature of curiosity you cannot achieve a superposition the way this formulation supposes over the nature of curiosity, so that importance becomes a characteristic that one can evaluate abstractly, question to question, over the field of all questions, right? And you could write a formula about this or a proof of this if you were a mathematician or a logician, right? What is the most, what question produces the most benefit when answered is another way of asking this question. And ironically, this question is important, because if one doesn't negatively address it, in the sense of saying, well, that's a very interesting formulation you've got there, beware of how deceptive it's likely to be. If one doesn't approach this question negatively, or form answer it with, well, I'm not sure, but it ain't that one, right? One's inclined to be deceived by it because it looks really good on the surface, right? It's like, what's the most valuable gem? Well, there kind of would be some answer to that, because the axiomatic environment in which we determine the value of gems is set by human commerce and historical precedent and such like, scarcity and such like this. But the axiomatic context in which questions are evaluated is not thus set. And that's the deceptive thing, right? It's as if I accidentally moved the context of commercial value into the context of philosophy and the possibility of questions. But really what I was trying to get at was, isn't the practice of a koan a kind of a question, right? Because when the monks surrounding a feral dog ask old Joshu, "Oh, master, does even this lowly dog, is this dog also replete with Buddha nature?" And Joshu says, they were asking him a question. And Joshu says, "Moo." It does seem a kind of a question. And when one sits with the koan of Mu in Zen meditation or some other koan, there does seem to be some kind of goal. So I could understand that. I don't have to, but I can understand that as a quest, right? And the quest is to sort of crack open the shell of that koan, which in a way is to crack open the shell of the mind in a particular fashion, or a fashion unique to each koan, a fashion specific to each koan and each practitioner of Zen. But I was kind of trying to game the game of insight. I wanted to know if there was a most important question. And this is the kind of thing that you would imagine to find in a story about someone who, right, has summoned a demon, or has a wish-granting jewel, or has rubbed Aladdin's lamp and the genie has emerged, and they're granted a wish, and they usually very confusedly suppose that they know what to want. They also suppose that having had what they consider to be the great good fortune of achieving contact with a non-human intelligence, such as that of a demon or an angel or a genie or a jinn, that they have now earned some non-ordinary reward which they can take great advantage of and which will soothe the trials and tribulations of human incarnate existence. And boy, are they confused about that. That's a moment of incredible danger right there. And partly just because the idea that I am advanced enough in my understanding of relationships and the essences of being to know what to want, while not impractical in a certain axiomatic context, right? Like if I go to the grocery store, I kind of know what to want. It's not too much of a problem. But in terms of all possible things, now the context has gotten a bit broad. And I may not realize that, weirdly, there's an unusual kind of balance, an intelligence of balance in the world, and if one's actions tip this balance too far in one direction, right, it's going to correct. Yeah. So if suddenly I have all the money in the world, right, there's going to be some correction in some domain for that. And this was an idea that was introduced to me by a friend of mine who's a philosopher and a very interesting intelligence, Dr. Kevin Baru. And he described to me a conversation he had had with a sort of newfound friend over dinner, in which he asked him, if you could win the lottery, would you choose to? And the man said no. And Kevin said, well, that's an unusual answer. I don't know too many people who would answer that way. Why would you not win the lottery? Don't you work for money? And the man says, yes, I work for money. And Kevin said, well, wouldn't you want to, be freed from having to work for money? And the man said, it's an attractive idea. And Kevin said, all right, so given that it's an attractive idea to be freed from having to work for money, why wouldn't you want to win the lottery? And the man said, well, I can't say explicitly exactly what's going on. It looks to me like the way things are, the universe abhors imbalance. It doesn't just abhor a vacuum. It abhors lots of different things. And one of them is the sudden shift in what was previously a relatively balanced situation to an imbalanced situation. And so that if I were to suddenly acquire some otherwise unimaginable sum of money in one dimension of my life, it's hard for me to imagine that there'd be no sort of repercussive wave, as if we're in a bathtub of opportunities, right? And suddenly there's a huge splash over here in the bathtub of wealth, and then that doesn't generate any waves in any other bathtub. So that's hard for me to imagine. So I would expect that if I were to suddenly be subject to otherwise unimaginable good fortune, so to speak, without necessarily needing to think about this metaphysically, then I would probably also be subject to some similar degree, or maybe even greater degree, of suddenly arriving misfortune. And that's a very philosophical perspective on the question. But many of us are aware that those who are unaccustomed to wealth and who suddenly acquire some degree of wealth, it doesn't have to be huge. It could be relatively modest. Let's say someone who's never had Let's just get a closer look at these. Let's say someone who's never had more than $100 and suddenly they were, a teenager. I knew a couple kids like this. Suddenly they get 25 grand. Most of those kids were obliterated by that. In fact, I don't know one that wasn't. I only know 3 or 4 that something like that happened to. And if it didn't outright kill any of them that I'm aware of, but it didn't help them much. And it made a lot of trouble for them. Or they made a lot of trouble for themselves with the money. But I'm a big fan of quests and questions. And a quest is like an inward orientation, right? The quest to understand whether or not there are divine beings is important. And too often, that quest is aborted by an answer, right? Yes, and the Bible tells you so. Yes, and the Quran tells you so. Yes, and the Torah tells you so. Yes, and the shamans have proven it. Right? Too quick an answer is likely to be deceptive, and the end to a quest that really it should keep being reformulated as one proceeds, just as in a romantic relationship or a close friendship. And it's interesting that we have these ship words as if, which is actually a metaphor strewn throughout English, as if relationships are vehicles, right? And this is not an accident. There's a great book called Metaphors We Live By, which is one of the earlier surveys of metaphors embedded in English, extremely enlightening for people who want to more clearly understand some of the tropes we are subject to unconsciously as English users. Normally I cite authors, but my memory at the moment isn't allowing that. But you can easily look up the book Metaphors We Live By and get a copy if you're interested. I strongly urge you to do so if you like to read such books or are thus inclined. That's part of my quest, right? To understand things. I have questions like, why is there only one species of animal on Earth that we know of that uses formally representational language? How did this happen? Why do living worlds produce animals like this? Was there interference from some divine being or some advanced other dimensional being? I mean, was this a plan? Was this just a sort of an accident of evolutionary nature? These are quite something. They're soft. They're beautiful. So I have a lot of questions, and I encourage people who want to broaden their minds and get in touch with the deeper aspects of their humanity to quest, right? To acquire an urgent desire for adventure and for some purpose that one finds noble and true and good and trustworthy and exciting and amazing. For many of us, the sort of common the most common instance of this, or the common instances examples are things like finding a mating partner, getting a job, which is sort of a terrible thing, and usually a kind of miserable quest for many, many people, if not most. Finding a home, obtaining a pet, growing a garden, making money, Sometimes we may have the quest to produce some unique creative output, such as a scientific theory, weird first example, a piece of artwork, a piece of music, a collection of stories, a novel, a book of essays, an illustrated selection of the finest dreams from our lifetime. Some of us quest for knowledge. We want to become mathematically adept, or we want to be biologists, or, sociologists, or therapists, or masseuses, or martial artists. I'm still surprised by my weird question, right? What's the most important question? And by the strange answer, well, I'm not sure, but that's not it. And I can understand why that's the answer. And I was able to explain partially, a little bit technically, why that must be so. However, if you reduce the scope, right? If you say and if you change the question slightly, what are some of the most important questions in biology? What are some of the most important questions in cognition, in human communications, in understanding human behavior, in entomology, in chemistry, in physics, in computer science? These kinds of questions, show me a selection of the most important questions in some field. Those kinds of surveys can be useful and even helpful, because we may then select one of them to focus on. And most of us are going to focus. We're not going to just go around collecting questions, right? We're going to chase a few of them. And some of those questions can be disambiguated to the point where they reform, right? At a new order of insight, if we presume that up is better, right? Then going up the ladder of orders is good. If we presume down is better, it's down. If it's, forward, it's forward, whatever we presume. But it is possible, enjoyable, exciting, when we experience that rewarding feeling of having leapt to a new order of awareness or intelligence or understanding or capacity to grasp or manipulate. Some aspect of the ideological, cognitive, or material, or mathematical universe. Some aspects of a subcontext that we can, reasonably identify. I'm a supporter of good quests. It's part of what makes being an incarnate human being exciting, is that we have this capacity for adventure. And some quests are just really unique to individuals, right? I think there were very few people who ever thought they were going to free climb El Capitan, but eventually one was born and succeeded, quite astonishingly, at a quest otherwise unimaginable. What did he get? Well, he didn't receive any object. You could say he got some recognition, but what he got was the experience of succeeding in that case. There was someone who wanted to go around the world for the first time. There are these kinds of people who want to do something that's never been done before simply because it's never been done. I'm not as interested in that. To me, that's a little bit personally, like there's things I want to do that have never been done, don't get me wrong, but to have that as the motivating like root of the thing, it's not interesting enough. It seems a little grandiose. One of my personal quests is to have some direct experience of the minds of our distant ancestors. I'd like to know what they thought they were looking at when they looked at the night sky. Long before the ideas of planets and stars emerged, what were they seeing? And I don't want to know, sure, I'm interested in knowing that intellectually. And there are many quests that are intellectual. But a lot of the quests that matter to me are quests of experiential relation with something. I want that. I want intimacy. Yeah. I want that kind of knowledge. I want the flavor of the thing in my mouth. I want to bring it inside me. I want it to bring me inside it. I want, without being consumed and dying. For example, I'm really interested in sharks, but I don't wish to be consumed by one. And I don't need to taste them either. But I would like to relate with them. Have that kind of intimacy. That would be astonishing, if relatively safe. And not all quests are safe. Some of them will get you killed. Some of them will get you badly injured. Some of them will get you isolated. Quests often have risks, right? That's part of what makes their fulfillment rewarding. I was listening to, as I have been lately, Eric Weinstein's podcast, and I was listening to him talking with his brother about a quest relating to antagonistic pleiotropy and telomerase, telomeres. By the way, if you have any interest in molecular biology or genetics or anything like that, hey, listen to that podcast. It's fabulous. Even if you're just interested in like drug research and mouse models, listen to that podcast. But both of those guys, Eric and Brett, brothers, they're guys who go on quests, right? They have all kinds of quests. And some of them are social, right? Some of them are sociological or involve the development of society, right? We too often use the word evolution here, but I think it's a misnomer because evolution doesn't necessarily mean development. It sort of means, I don't know. It's really hard to say clearly what it actually means. It refers to an array of studies of how life undergo stabilization and transformation over time in living contexts. Something like this. But it's not always development, right? I mean, if by development we mean progress. I would like to know the mind of a tree. I would like to know the mind of a bee. I would like to participate in the mind of the sea. I want to know and understand so many beautiful things. And I find we learn best together, so it's often wonderful to have partners in quest who share our enthusiasm, our curiosity, our passion, our drive, who feel the same gravity, right? but have their own unique histories and perspectives and orientations and such. Because when we are together with such people, we're almost always better off than when we are alone, though there are a few things that we have to do pretty much by ourselves. Thank you for joining me. Catch you next time.